All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. Those who might be new to Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, we are all about bringing science, adventure, exploration, and conservation live into classrooms across North America and beyond. So now that school is back in session, we'll be broadcasting 30, 40, even 50 live events each month for classrooms to join in with us. So today, September 22nd, is an important day. It is World Rhino Day. So all day long, we've been running events with conservationists, with scientists, with explorers, with filmmakers who have dedicated their life to not only protecting our threatened rhino species around the world, but also bringing the issues to us, documenting it, and bringing it out to the general public. So I'm really excited for today's event. Today we have CeCe Sieffert joining us. She is the Deputy Director of the International Rhino Foundation, where she leads the conservation field programs for the 5 rhino species in Asia and Africa. So the International Rhino Foundation is dedicated to ensuring the survival of rhinos through strategic partnerships, targeted protection, and scientifically sound interventions. So previous to this, CeCe has worked in conservation. In 2011, she was in China with the International Crane Foundation, and she's also worked in community-based conservation and looking into illegal wildlife trade with the World Wildlife Fund. So CeCe, it's so great to have you joining us live today. We've got a great group of classrooms who are going to join us on camera. We've got even more starting to tune in live via YouTube and Facebook, and we're excited to get to know you and your work a little bit better.
Fabulous. Thanks so much for having me on today. I'm really excited to talk about the 2 most endangered rhino species, which are the Sumatran and the Javan rhinos. Just to start off, I wanted to give you an overview. I know you all have been hearing about rhinos all day. The International Rhino Foundation works both in Africa and in Asia to protect all 5 rhino species. And here's a map of some of the places where we work. But today we're going to focus on 2 species in particular. First, the Sumatran rhino, which is shown on the left. This species is considered the world's most endangered land mammal. And that's because there are fewer than 80 individuals. And of those 80, they're split into 10 smaller groups called subpopulations. Since they all aren't together, it makes it more difficult for these rhinos to find a mate and make new rhino babies. And because of this separation, the population has been declining. I'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing to reverse that trend. The Javan rhino, which is the picture on the right, the swimming rhino, is also critically endangered. We are thrilled to announce that the population is slowly growing. In fact, just yesterday, we made an announcement with the government of Indonesia that there are 2 new baby rhinos, Javan rhinos, born this year, bringing the total population up to 74 individuals. I'll dive in more into the challenges this species is facing and how we're helping them out quite a bit. So first, you might be wondering, where in the world are these animals? And here's a globe, and you can see Australia and Asia. And if you look at the highlighted black areas, this is the historic range where Sumatran rhinos in particular used to live. It seems pretty big, going all the way up into India and Bhutan, down through Thailand and Malaysia, and into the islands of Indonesia. Back in the day, there were hundreds of thousands of these species, but over the past 200 years, hunting, logging, agriculture, and human population growth has shrunk their habitat, and now both species are confined to only one country, Indonesia. Indonesia is a country made up of 17,000 islands. It spans all the way from Malaysia all the way over to Australia. It actually has the 4th largest population in the world, with more than 260 million people. But despite that huge population, it's also one of the most diverse places on the planet. Biodiversity is what we call the variety of life, whether it's plant life or animal life that's in one particular spot. In fact, the diversity of plants and animals in Indonesia is so great that it's called a biodiversity hotspot. So most of the natural landscape is tropical rainforest, which is home to some of these amazing plants and creatures that you see here. Also hiding in the jungle are these solitary animals, the Sumatran rhino. As I said, they're fewer than 80, and they're so shy and secretive that even the rangers that protect them don't often see them in the forest. That's why we still don't have the exact population number, but our teams are working on that right now. If we look a bit closer at the map of Indonesia, we'll see the island of Sumatra, which is the 6th largest island in the world. There are 3 clusters of Sumatran rhinos here on this island. The first is up in the north in the Loser ecosystem. This mountainous jungle is the only place on Earth where rhinos, elephants, tigers, and orangutans still live in the same place in the wild. Up in this area, there are fewer than 50 rhinos, and they're broken into 6 smaller subpopulations. There are 2 more protected areas in southern Sumatra called Bukit Barisan Selatan National Park. We call it BBS for short, and Waikambas National Park. And the populations in these 2 parks are much smaller. There are 2 major threats to Sumatran rhinos. The first is poaching, which is illegal hunting. Poachers kill rhinos for their horn, which people mistakenly believe to be like medicine. However, scientists have studied rhino horn and discovered that it's just made of keratin, which is the same material as your hair or your fingernails. Rhino horn is actually not medicine. It would be as if you were chewing on your own toenails. So one of the ways that poachers catch rhinos is with snares. This picture we're looking at right now is a picture of a ranger who has collected snares that were put out in the forest by poachers. The rangers collect and destroy these snares so that rhinos and all the other species that live in the forest aren't killed. The second threat is deforestation, which reduces wildlife's habitat and forces rhinos to live into little forest pockets, unable to meet one another and to breed. When there isn't enough breeding, there aren't enough rhino babies to replace the older rhinos who have died. And when that happens, the population falls and the species moves closer to extinction. So if Sumatran rhinos can't get together to make babies, then we're just going to have to help them out. 2 years ago, we launched an ambitious program with the government of Indonesia and other conservation organizations to capture the wild rhinos and bring them together into a conservation breeding program. This program is called the Sumatran Rhino Rescue. So right now, as we speak, our teams are currently tracking 6 Sumatran rhinos in the wild to determine their home ranges. And once we have a clear idea of where those 6 animals each spend their time and how they move around, we will dig what's called a pit trap to capture the animals. Once in the pit trap, they are very carefully transported to the Sumatran Rhino Sanctuary, also known as the SRS. The International Rhino Foundation currently runs the SRS, where there are 7 resident rhinos. The additional animals we're currently tracking will be part of this breeding program so that we can produce as many rhino babies as possible. Once the population starts to grow in a large enough number, we will release the animals back out into the forest where they will be watched over by the rhino protection units. And back in the forest is just where they belong. So the second rhino species that lives in Indonesia is the Javan rhino. And then you'll see a lot of the pictures I have of Javan rhinos are of them swimming in the water. So if we go back to the map of Indonesia, we can see just how tiny the Javan rhino's range is. Earlier, we talked about the island of Sumatra, but just below that is the island of Java. That island is about the same size as North Carolina. But North Carolina has a population of only 10 million people. Java has a population of 141 million people. Just like the Sumatran rhino, they ranged across Southeast Asia. Now the entire population is in one national park on the tip of Java Island. That park is known as Ujung Kulon National Park, and it's only 466 square miles. That's smaller than the city of Los Angeles. Just like the Sumatran rhino, the Javan rhino is threatened with poaching. Our rhino protection units, and here's a picture of some of them crossing a river in the national park. They are 4-man teams that live in the jungle for 2 weeks at a time. Everything they have for those 2 weeks is carried on their backs. They protect not only the rhino species, but all the other endangered species that share the habitat with the rhino. It is not an easy job. But their round-the-clock protection is critical to ensuring that the Javan rhino population remains protected and continues to grow. The second threat to the Javan rhino is a plant called the Orangu Palm. This is it. It looks lovely and green, but it's actually a very aggressive plant that blocks out other plant species in the jungle. More importantly, it is inedible for Javan rhinos. They can't eat it, and it blocks out the sunlight for the foods that they do eat. Basically, it just takes up space that more useful plants could take. It makes an area uninhabitable for Javan rhinos, but we need that space if we want the population to grow. So we have found that the best solution to the Orangu Palm problem is to just get rid of it. We hire people from local communities to cut down the Orangu Palm. If you look at these two pictures side by side, you can see how this process works. The picture on the left is an area that only had Orangu growing, which had been recently cut down. The picture on the right was taken just a few weeks later. Already in that short period of time, rhino food plants started growing back in a once barren place. This program is a win-win. It provides much needed jobs for local farmers. These rice farmers have income when it's harvest time, but they struggle to make money during the rest of the year. So with this program, families can make money during the non-harvest time. The benefit here is that families no longer have to go into the forest to get the resources they need to survive, and that means they're no longer competing with Javan rhinos. The second win is that we're expanding rhino habitat. So places that were once covered in Orangu Palm that were not welcoming to Javan rhinos, there was just nothing left for them to eat. So by cutting down the Orangu Palm, rhino food plants are given a chance to grow, and Javan rhinos have more to eat. This is critical for ensuring that the growing population has the space they need to spread out. So we've learned from the Javan rhino that we can ensure their protection with three things. First is the protection from poaching. The second is ensuring that they have enough to eat. And the third is ensuring that they have enough space to roam. And we're already seeing good results. And hopefully this video will work for you. Click play. All right. So this is brand new footage of Javan rhinos. So IRF works with the national park, and we put camera traps out in the forest to see if we can find the rhinos. So this is one of the new Javan rhino baby calves born this year. It is a young boy, and his name is Luther, and he was born earlier this spring. It's pretty exciting to have footage like this. If you think about the population, there are only 74 of these animals. So to actually get 2 of them on camera is pretty incredible. This is the second baby that was born this year. This is a girl, and her name is Helen. So for the first 2 years of their lives, rhino babies stay with their moms by their side. They drink the mother's milk, and the mother teaches them how to look for food in the forest and how to survive. So there's little Helen hanging out with her mom. It's pretty exciting stuff. The next thing I wanted to show you was a video that was created for the Sumatran Rhino rescue. And this is where I'll wrap it up. This is the program I was talking about earlier, where we're capturing rhinos from the forest, the Sumatran rhinos, and bringing them then into the breeding sanctuary. I hope you like it, and I look forward to chatting with you after these two, or after this last video. So here we go. All right, so if you love rhinos as much as I do, you guys could get involved. One of the best ways is to learn about rhinos, and we love posting pictures of our programs in the field for both the Sumatran and Javan rhinos and for the other 3 species in India and the 2 in Africa. So with that, I'm happy to open it up and answer all of your questions about Sumatran and Javan rhinos.
All right, CeCe, thanks so much. That was great. It was especially great to see that camera trap footage at the end, to see 2 in the wild, and it really does give hope for the future of the species. And obviously, a huge thank you to yourself and all the other people on the team who are working so hard to make that happen.
Absolutely.
Perfect. We've got a great group joining us, both live on YouTube and Facebook, but also with us in camera spots. So just to give a few shout outs here, we've got someone tuning in from India, Mexico. We've got another group in Front Royal, Virginia. Lots of groups in Canada. Looks like Quebec as well. Los Angeles. So that's great. Great to see so many people joining in. Use that chat sidebar on the right, or it might be at the bottom, depending on what you're using, and make sure you send us in some of those questions. All right. Well, let's start meeting some classrooms, and let's start stealing some of their classrooms questions. So I'm going to bring Mrs. Fromm's class into the call. There we go. How are you doing today, boys and girls?
What's up?
Good.
What's up?
All right. Does anybody have a question for CeCe about the rhinos?
All right, Abraham, come on over. You can pull down your mask and talk right into the camera here.
And Joe, before you start, do I exit out of my program so I can see the kids?
Oh, yeah, you can go ahead and CeCe. Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Hello, my name is Ibrahim, and I have a question about the first group of rhinos. I forgot what they were called.
The Sumatran rhinos?
Yeah, the Sumatran Rhinos. So is it because when they're in small groups, there's not enough females or males for them to breed, or is it because that they don't have enough food to breed?
So it's the fact that they're all separated. They used to live all over Indonesia, and now the problem is that with deforestation and human population growth, there's a little bit of forest here, there's a little bit of forest here, but there's a lot of people in between. So these rhinos can't mate with these rhinos, and they can't get together and have babies. It's just that they're separated. In the little spots where they live, they do have enough food, but they're just not getting together with other rhinos to mate.
All right, Mrs. Fromm's class, you joined us right at the wire today. Where are you guys joining us from today?
Minnesota.
Minnesota, awesome.
Yep.
Perfect. Well, we'll swing back your way for another question in a little bit.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see. Let's go to a high school class this time. They're hanging out with us in Florida. Let me bring them up there. There we go. How are we doing, boys and girls?
Hi. Say hi.
Hello. My name is Carson, and I had a question about the people that protect the rhinos. Do they do that all over the world for different species?
Yeah, they do. It's really incredible the work that they do. And the approaches they take are a little different depending on each species, and their day-to-day life is a little different depending on each species. So, for example, in Africa, in Southern Africa, it's a much different landscape. It's drier, it's more open grass savanna. So when you see pictures of beautiful safari, you see open grass fields with occasional trees and animals walking by. And protecting a rhino is a very different experience in the savanna than it would be in the deep forests of Indonesia. In Indonesia, there could be a rhino 5 feet away and you wouldn't know because the forest is so dense. So it's more than just looking for the animal. Sometimes they have to look for what's called spoor, which is any sign of the animal. It could be footprints, it could be rhino poop they find on the ground. Sometimes if they're biting leaves, there's a certain way some of the species bite the leaves, and you can tell by looking at the plant that a rhino had been by recently. Sometimes they rub or scratch their horns, and there's a certain kind of rubbing marking. And sometimes they spray. So, and that means they just sort of do a certain kind of pee to mark their territory. If you see a dog go out to a dog park, they pee on every tree. Rhinos do something somewhat similar. So being able to track that as well. But these guys go out for weeks at a time. They're carrying everything on their backs. That means not just, their sleeping bag, their clothes, their food, but they're also carrying things to protect themselves. Poachers these days are using automatic weapons and some pretty scary equipment. So these guys have to ensure that they've got excellent binoculars and night vision goggles, that they have first aid kits in case anybody gets hurt. We help train the rangers in first aid, field first aid, patrol care, and so everything they need to live for 2 weeks is on their backs.
All right, great question. And I think, you brought up such a good point, is that, all around the world, in some of these places, the rangers, the conservationists, they are putting their lives at risk, and in many cases to protect and save these species. So I'm glad we're acknowledging that on World Rhino Day. That's awesome. I want to give a shout out to a few more groups that are joining us. We've got someone tuning in Boston. We've got grade 5s with Mrs. Mundy joining us in Ontario, Canada. So don't be shy. Use that chat sidebar and get us some more questions coming via the chats. So let's jump to another one of our live classrooms. Here we go. This time, let's visit Mr. Armstrong. They're joining us in Hanover. Looks like some grade 7 and 8 students. Let me see if I can bring them into the call. There we go. Mr. Armstrong, if you're able to unmute, we'd love to grab a question. Or another option too is you could send the question via the chat as well. Okay, we'll come back and maybe something will come in via the chat. So I want to go to a question that came in from Akash, who's joining us in India. And Akash is wondering, do you place chips or maybe a tracking collar? How do you keep track of some of the rhinos in that dense bush?
That's an exciting question. And there's some really cool technology coming out for tracking rhinos. So some of you may have seen that there are animals in the wild that rangers put a collar either on the neck or the arm of an animal to track it. And that collar actually sends out a radio frequency. And they use equipment listening to the radio frequency to be able to determine where the rhino is, or the elephant, or the wild dog, or whatever they're tracking. But we have, in the field, we're testing this new equipment, which we're really excited about. And it's actually a transmitter about the size of your thumb, maybe a little fatter than my thumb, but about the same size. And what they do is they drill a hole into the rhino's horn. They put the transmitter into the horn and then cover it up with epoxy. So it's sealed into the rhino's horn. And then it transmits a radio frequency to base stations in the area so that the monitors and the rangers know where these rhinos are at all times. This helps us ensure that the rhinos are safe, because if we hear that there are poachers coming in from one direction, we know where the animals are and we can respond appropriately. It also helps because it's important to know how many rhinos you have in the wild. Monitoring is critical to ensuring that rhinos are safe in the wild. So monitoring allows us to know how many animals are out there, what the sex ratio is, that's the how many boys versus how many girls, population, age, whether there are a lot of babies coming in, whether there are animals missing, which is how we know if we're not finding the body of a rhino, it's one way we know that they've been poached. So this technology is critical for ensuring that monitoring is as accurate as possible.
All right, that's great. Really cool technology, and yeah, definitely a lot smaller than some of those collars that you see that you move around through the bush with. Perfect. Mr. Katz's class in Chicago. So they're joining us virtually, as some classes have to in this new reality. So we get a nice picture of them looking a little Brady Bunch there, which is pretty cool. How's everyone doing today? Want to give a wave at the camera?
Say hi, guys.
Very cool. All right, Mr. Katz, we'd love to grab a question or two. I know you put a few in the chat already.
Sure. So Athena, can you unmute and ask your question, please?
Around how many surviving rhino species are there, and where else do they live in the world?
So that's a great question, Athena. There are 5 rhino species. I've got my World Rhino Day t-shirt on with the 5 rhinos. There are 2 species in Africa, the black rhino and the white rhino, and there are about 5,600 black rhino and a little over 20,000 white rhino in Africa. There's also a rhino that lives in India and Nepal called the greater one-horn rhino, and there are about 3,600 of, sorry, there's 50, I always get the numbers wrong. There are 5,600 of those. And then the two species that live in Indonesia, there's fewer than 80 of the Sumatran rhino and now 74 of the Javan rhino. So all in total, there's fewer than 30,000 rhinos in the entire planet. It's not a lot.
No, definitely not. Yeah, Mr. Katz's class, that was perfect. Thank you so much. I love that setup. It's really cool to see. We're definitely going to come back your way shortly for another question, but I want to grab another one from online here. And CeCe, they're wondering if you have yourself been able to get out into the field in some of these spots.
I have. I have the best job in the world because I get to go out into the field and see these incredible species. So I travel to Indonesia several times a year. I still haven't seen a Sumatran or a Javan rhino wild. I have seen the 7 Sumatran rhinos at the Sumatran Rhino Sanctuary, and that's pretty exciting to think that I've seen about 10% of the entire population. I've also been very lucky to go to India to see the greater one-horned. I got to see 99 in one day. I was hoping to see 100, but I saw 99 in one day. And then I've also been so fortunate to go to Southern Africa, both to South Africa and to Swaziland, to see both black and white rhinos in the field.
All right. Very cool. Pretty darn lucky.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's bring in a couple more classrooms here. Let's go to Mrs. Fromm's class and see if they have a follow-up in Minnesota.
All right, Justin, come on back. You can take your mask down when you get here.
What is the lifespan of all the different rhinos?
Great question.
That is a great question. Lifespan of rhinos can range, should be in different ranges. So, and we're not exactly sure of the wild ranges. Because of zoo rhinos, we know that some can live, 20, 30 years. In the wild, sometimes they don't live as long because it's not as easy in the wild, because they're finding their own food. They don't have veterinarians to take care of them, etc. But 20 or 30 years is about how long a rhino can live.
All right, great question. Let's see, another question here online. Can you tell us about maybe some of the other equipment that people would use in the field while studying rhinos?
Sure, there's all sorts of equipment. So one of the things, and you've seen them in my talk today, is a camera trap, and that's essentially, it's about this big. It's about the size of a Pop-Tart box, I guess, and it's attached to a tree, and inside is a digital camera and some batteries, and they are motion detected. So if something walks by, they'll take a picture of it. There's a new sort of generation of camera traps coming out, not only take video, but they also have a way to transmit the photo or video that's being captured on the camera. So traditionally, people go out and take out the card. I don't know if any of your parents have like a regular digital camera, and it's got a battery pack and a little SD card. So you take out that card and you can do the analysis to see what animals have been walking by. But now with these new radio frequency cameras, it can send a live, or pretty much as close as live, signal to the base camp. So it's essentially like a text message with a photo, and it lets the rangers know in real time what's walking by. And what's even more exciting is there's a new generation, the newest generation, I should say, of these cameras, is that they use artificial intelligence to analyze what is walking by. So if it's walking on 2 feet, that's probably a problem, because usually it's 4-footed animals that walk by, all the lions and tigers and bears that walk by in the forest. But if it's a 2-footed person and it's not one of the regular rangers, then it could be a poacher. And so the camera sends out an alarm because it's saying, hey, we are detecting a human walking by in this habitat, and that's probably not good. So it allows the rangers to be able to respond immediately when a person walks by in the forest or out in the savanna.
Okay, well, thank you, Kyle, for sending that question in online. There's also, we've got Ray joining us, and he's saying, hey, CeCe, greetings from Milwaukee County Zoo. So very cool, Ray. Thanks for joining us today. Let's go back to Florida. I know they have another question. They just sent me a message. So, all right, Creekside High School, who's up?
Hi, I'm Jackson Christie. I was wondering, what's the punishment for hunting one of these rhinos, one of the rhino species?
That is a great question. And the hard thing is that it is different depending on the country in which the crime happens. So there are some countries that have very strict laws, and even more importantly, they actually enact the laws and prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. So let's say, even if the law says if you poach, you have to go to jail, sometimes, and sadly, oftentimes, poachers have networks, and in those networks are lawyers or people who can bribe judges to say, okay, well, you have to pay a small fine, but you don't have to go to jail. So one of the things we are working on is not only protecting the rhinos out in the field, but in the countries where the rhinos live, we are working with judges and lawyers, and we're even working with the rangers themselves to train how to handle a crime scene. So I don't know if you watch like CSI, you've got all of the evidence and you can easily tamper the evidence. So if we train the rangers, that when you come on a crime scene, you have to make sure you do A, B, C, and D in the right order to ensure that all of the evidence coming into court can be used against the poachers. Then we work with lawyers and judges to make sure they understand the fullest extent of the law. What can they prosecute? What is a crime? What are the punishments for these crimes? And by keeping up to date and keeping everyone apprised of what can be done, we're ensuring that when someone is caught poaching, the evidence is correctly collected, the person is going to jail, the judges know what's going on, and they're actually being prosecuted and being punished for their crimes. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer for that question, because it definitely ranges from place to place.
All right, great question. Mr. Katz in Chicago, let's bring you back in.
Peter, you had or I'm sorry, Preston, you had a question. What was your question?
Yes, hello. I was wondering, how do you know where to put the cameras in order to see the rhinos?
That's a great question. So yeah, forest is big. It's hard when you get into the jungle to know really where to put them. So what we do is we essentially take a map of the park and we put a grid over it. And the grid, each square in the grid is 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers. And we put a certain, depending on how many cameras we have, we'll put a certain number of cameras in that grid. And then we ensure they're evenly distributed around the park. Once that happens, we get a general baseline of rhinos moving across certain areas. When we're trying to track a specific rhino, so for example, in the program where we're trying to capture the Sumatran rhinos and bring them into the breeding program, we move the cameras around more frequently based on ranging patterns in other grids nearby, or based on the data coming in from the camera that's in that grid. So sometimes we'll bring in more cameras in a certain spot where there are where we're finding rhino signs, so that we have a better idea what paths they're using from day to day, and that helps us figure out where we're going to capture them. Because those pit traps that I described, it's literally a hole in the ground, and they fall through a false door, and they land on like a cushion of soft leaves, and at the bottom of the pit trap. Those pit traps are put on the paths that they use frequently. So camera trap, we sort of do a grid and then consolidate based on data coming in from the field.
All right, very cool. So with the Sumatran and the Javan Rhino, we have someone who's curious about gender differences. So are there physical differences? Is there a size difference? How can you tell just kind of in a glance?
With the Sumatran Rhino, you can't really tell at a glance. Both Sumatran and Javan Rhinos have much smaller horns than their cousins over in Africa and India. The theory is that because they're in the jungle, they don't want to be swinging around a big horn. So those two species do have smaller horns. when you look at Sumatran rhinos, it's hard to tell the difference other than sometimes males are larger than females. With the Javan rhino, we're finding that females have little to almost no horn. So in one of those videos that I shared, and we'll share the links to those videos, you'll see that the mom that's with the little baby girl, she hardly has any horn at all. And that's often at first glance how we can tell if it's a female or male. And then there's always the old-fashioned way of looking on the back end to see what equipment's in place.
All right, fair enough. I had a feeling that would be the best way, but sometimes there's size differences and other things that you can pick out. All right. So Mr. Katz just sent me a message. They've got a follow-up question here in Chicago, so I'm going to bring them back in.
Thank you. So one of the questions that I had was, what do you all do with all of the, like, do you have an abundance of camera trap data that you're like, man, I just wish I had people to go through this all for us?
We do have a lot of data, and we are working with technology companies to essentially create an analysis platform so that the camera, based on how the specific characteristics of a rhino, the computer can go through each photo and see whether or not it's a rhino. Once it's identified as most likely a rhino, it then gets sent to somebody on our team who then visually says, oh yes, that's a rhino, or not. And then with the monitoring program, what we do is there's certain characteristics that help us identify which individual rhinos are which. And it's the shape of the horn, the shape of the ear, wrinkles around their eyes, things like that. And that helps us identify which rhino is which.
Cool, thank you. And then the other question we had was in regards to, like, what happens, well, actually, Pranav, can you answer your question or ask your question real quick?
Okay, yeah. What happens to rhinos that are illegally sold to zoos, and if are they taken back to like a reserve or something, and is there any punishment that is given to like the zoo for like illegally taking a rhino?
So that's a great question. Most zoos in the United States are what's called accredited, which means they have to sort of go through a process to make sure they're doing everything according to the law and that they're taking care of the animals in the best way possible. And there's two major accreditation groups that make sure that the zoos are, in fact, sort of using best practices. And with that accreditation, one of the things they need to ensure is that when they bring a new animal into their collection, that animal has not been collected illegally. Oftentimes, if you see maybe in the news, like, this zoo had a new rhino baby, and if you start having more babies, oftentimes rhinos are traded from one zoo to another. And that's a fantastic program. It's called the Species Survival Program. And there is a group that literally has what's called a stud book, and it keeps track of all the animals in the zoo populations. And they make sure that when the animals are moving around, it's often based on who is related to who. So you don't want, a brother and sister to be in the same zoo because they can't mate and have babies. So what you'll do is you'll move non-related animals from one zoo to another, and it ensures that the genetic diversity of the species is as diverse as possible. We like to say that in the natural world, as well as the human world, that the more diversity, the better. So you want not two non-related animals mating with one another. So one of the sort of side note of that, one of the processes that zoos have to go through is to work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to get special permitting to bring animals into the United States. And that permitting is another step to ensure that the animal is not being captured illegally, so that it's all above the board. They know where it came from, etc.
Okay, great questions today, both coming in via the chat and from our students. So we can maybe squeeze in one or two more before we wrap for today. So Minnesota or Florida, if you want to give me a wave at the camera, if you guys have a wrap-up question, I'll come visit your classrooms. Yeah, okay. Mrs. Fromm, did you wave at the camera?
My question is, what kind of background or degree do you have to do what you do? Because some of the kids are like, oh, you can just go out and protect these rhinos. But I think you have to have a little bit of an education to do this.
I do, yes. And it's a pretty cool education. So the work in school is a fun path to a job like this. So in college, I studied biology, and I have a master's of science in conservation biology. So if you like the natural world, there are really incredible programs out there, both for undergraduate and graduate programs, so that you can learn about the natural world. And there's more than just wildlife conservation. There's people who focus on the oceans, people who focus on clean air, clean water. There's so many incredible careers out there in conservation because we've only got one planet, and it's our only home, so we need to take care of it.
Absolutely. I'm going to squeeze in one more question from Mr. Cass's class that just came in via the chat. And they're wondering if there was a piece of technology that's really helpful, something that's missing, what would it be? If you could have like your dream piece of technology to help work in the field or monitor or...
Let's see. Well, right now it's not a issue of a technology constraint. I mean, there's always new incredible technology coming out. For example, that tracker that goes in the rhino's horn. It's just amazing. Often the constraint is the funding to get enough people out in the field and to ensure they have the equipment that they need. So, you know, everybody's affected by COVID this year. I've seen so many people wearing masks, which is critical. And, but, you know, it's really impacting conservation in the field. So particularly in Southern Africa, a lot of conservation is funded by tourism. So when people go over there and go on safari, the money they spend on their safari actually pays to keep rangers in the field and to ensure that these animals are protected. But right now, there has been a lockdown since March for international visitors coming into many countries where rhinos live. And that means $0 are coming in. And that means $0 are going to conservation. All of a sudden, there's this unexpected, just complete stop in funding. So we've been lucky enough to provide emergency grants to several of these programs in the field to ensure that they can keep the rangers employed during this time when there's no money coming in. But really it's a game we constantly play where we're asking donors and we're asking the US government and we're asking foundations to give us money so that we can keep rhinos in the field protected. So there are incredible tech partners out there who are always coming up to us with amazing ideas and incredible solutions, and we love partnering with them. But really, a lot of the times, it's trying to get funding to ensure that we can keep those rangers in the field, and as we say, keep those boots on the ground.
All right. Well, with today being World Rhino Day, I know we have some of the general public tuning in, so it could be a great thing to do to donate to an organization like the International Rhino Fund. So CeCe, thank you so much. Thank you for taking some time today, sharing, a little bit of your story about the Sumatran and the Javan rhinos. Obviously a huge thank you to everybody behind the scenes, your team that makes this happen all over the world, protecting these threatened species. It was such a pleasure to have you joining us today.
Great. Thanks so much. And thank you, everyone. And follow us at Rhinos IRF so you can learn more about these incredible species.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you to the classrooms who joined us live today. Thank you for joining us on World Rhino Day, and we look forward to seeing your classrooms in future events. So thanks again, everyone.